no, man. I'm Superman, and you're my kryptonite. It's awesome.
Right? Right?
Hey, I have that underwear.
Hey, this helps me with my mental health.
That's great.
Like I said, you can't even tell if I'm wearing pants or not. So, Bianca, you said it right, though. It's, being comfortable with being uncomfortable. So the fireside chat conversation about mental health is perfect. And, this recording is about getting the conversation started for all the people that are going to be watching it afterwards. And it's about starting this conversation and keep this conversation. And just before everybody came on, Paul and I were talking about how literally on a weekly basis, this conversation becomes more and more important. So, I mean, on that note, why don't we just jump right in and frame it up?
Absolutely.
So
I feel naked without Cal and
I know.
I know. They're like our heart and soul of continuing the mental health drive. But
they'll be watching after. He's tied up, but you'll be watching after. That's for sure.
Oh, I know.
Hello, Cal and Nick to the future.
Hello from the past. But yeah, and maybe that's part of what is telling. I mean that not only is there a stigma, that there's just not as much interest in wanting to talk about this stuff that all of us futurists know is everything we need to be talking about. But we're so focused on all these little shiny objects right in front of us that we're not kind of seeing the bigger picture and really the importance that mental health and wellness and balance and family and everything else play in just happiness, enjoyment. I think this whole COVID thing has led to a lot of reflection, I think, for a lot of folks. And it's something that we should be doing. I don't think it should be frowned upon or shunned.
Well, you're bang on. And, today's discussion is about tying mental health to construction and technology and construction. And for anybody who's going to be watching this and thinks that is a silly conversation, I think at the end of this conversation, just hang with us, because by the end of this conversation, it is a mission critical step to adoption, to progressive, cohesive teams. And I want to use the slide behind me to kind of frame this conversation, because I think it'll help kickstart things in the right direction. And by right direction, I actually mean a dark direction, because we're going to talk about some dark, hard truths, right? That no one is talking about, but needs to talk about. This graphic behind me is a slide from a course that we teach at Plexus on high performance. And when there's three things that are happening. One, the brain controls everything. So when we teach high performance or skills Plexus, or when I teach my fighters in professional mixed martial arts, the technical skills I could almost care less about. They're so far secondary to what's up here, because the brain controls everything. Everything comes from the brain. And what's happening in the world today is our brain was designed in like an ancient, hellish environment that is outdated by comparison to the world we live in now, which we refer to as a VUCA world: volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And that term originated in the military to describe challenging events where there is a serious risk of bodily harm or death, or impact on mental health due to critical stress. And what used to be a term to describe, military combat scenarios and law enforcement is now a commonplace. Our brain's response in critical stress was appropriate when we were cavemen, defending ourselves against, tigers and, prey, predators. And we endured that critical stress 2 or 3 times a day. But now we're enduring it hundreds of times a day. And for real scenarios and imagined scenarios, just with our own intelligence and anxiety, it's gotten to a point where we're manufacturing scenarios in our head that are creating critical stress responses. So, it's like being in a haunted house. A haunted house is fun for 3 minutes, but we're literally creating the critical stress response all day. So it's like being in a haunted house all day, right? And that's what's happening to our bodies. So we can't control that, but what we can control is training our brains to perform under pressure. And that's the graph behind me. When you have a trained human, they have a stronger ability to increase their positivity, their performance, their physical and mental health, right? And that's what happens over time when you're training. But when it comes to mental health in the short term, you've got short-term tactics, which is what Cal and Nick really do excel in. All the conversations that we've had around neurodiversity and building around the human experience, all of those help mitigate the impact of crisis and short-term stress and help people perform better in the moments. But then there's also the long-term approach of training to make sure that your brain is performing under pressure. So when it comes down to even simple things like adopting technology, we are dealing with a population where in a VUCA world where it's becoming more difficult to literally do anything at a high level of performance because we're just being bombarded by all these constant stressors. And that's where I think somebody like yourself, Paul, who, you're the president and CEO of DigiGroup, and right now you're doing that phenomenal project, or you're bidding on a project out in Greece. You work in smart cities, develop smart cities all over the world. So your perspective on this, I think, is paramount because of the fact that space and architecture have such a significant impact on our lives and our mental health. So give us your perspective on that. Go.
Well, thanks, Jed. And yeah, you're hitting on some honest truths, not just hard truths, honest truths in there. And, one of the things that we were in was this tactical age. Everything was just, the economy was good, and we were looking at tools and innovations, and people were disrupting things because they didn't even know why they were disrupting things, but it was cool to disrupt things. I just love a lot of the kids that are coming out with these wonderful apps that have never swung a hammer before. Thank you. But it helps. But was that really an age of excess? One of the big issues with our firm, right up until February, was the lack of skilled labor worldwide. This just wasn't in the U.S., right? From 2008, where we lost an entire generation coming into our world, that was the biggest stress I had. Wow, VUCA this, right? Hold my beer. It's like now, as an organization that has to be more like an umbrella, I feel like we have a different type of perspective on where we're touching the elephant. Because we have to have multiple hands, not only in the master planning and design phases, where, through the last couple of conversations between neurodiversity and understanding how space can affect the physiology of a human being. That's where a lot of our past has come from, through Dr. Jonas Salk, the polio vaccine virologist, who at the end of his career said, the built environment has a direct effect both in the near term and long term effects on how people feel. Almost like before emotional intelligence became a thing, that was what the Salk Institute was about. So the Salk Institute is actually designed in La Jolla, California, in two halves. There's this beautiful infinity creek that goes right off the hill, right? And on one side are the virologists. On the other side are the researchers. And those researchers are searching for everything from the effects of air quality, natural light, color, size, and space that affect humans, all the way through, Dr. Frederick Crick, who was the co-founder of the DNA helix, who also took this up as a passion about identifying the soul as a scientific measure. It is not spiritual, it's not religious, it's a real scientific measure of human. So from that design phase, we also have to face ourselves with the actual delivery. What are the delivery mechanisms that we need? Everyone's all hot on the world of factories and the industrialization of the construction industry and all that stuff. It's all great, but the bottom line is, unfortunately, we have two different measures. We're so used to projects when projects have nothing to do with the mechanization of a process. That's product. And they're two separate things. And until people really understand that that factory has to be running 24/7 to be at its maximum efficiency, but you're waiting on a contract of someone waiting to buy your home, good luck with that. That's why we have train wrecks, right? Then onto that infrastructure, and then put on top of that governance, and not making a place that looks like Las Vegas or Dubai, that's soulless. That's my job. I have to make people fall in love with a piece of dirt. So in the mental health world, we have the internal stresses of what we're in right now in this age of COVID, along with the external forces of, well, who's actually going to walk around a house or an apartment to actually buy my thing, right? So that's why things like Matterport and everything else are exploding inside the real estate industry, because they're at least moving real estate, especially with the people moving out of urban environments into the suburbs. My sister lives out in Deer Park, Long Island, out in Suffolk County, right outside of New York City. Her house maybe was $200,000-300,000. It's a Levitt house, right? $1.3 million she was asked, this person unsolicited asked for. People are going nuts, mentally crazy, trying to escape something because it's invisible. Instead of taking a look at the science and the data of things. And when we take a look at the science and the data of design, delivery, and then operations of a single building all the way through a complete city, we're starting to notice some trends. And I thought I'd share that with all of you, because I think that there's some big principles that we're discovering every day. And one of those is, do we have to be building what customers are telling us, and in your cases, for everyone else, your clients are saying, that are hiring you? Should you do the job? And that's a hard truth, because if you're really going to get down to it, we've lived in the age of tacticalness. What this age of COVID, what we call the COVID gym, says, stick strategy in there. And what the hell are you really doing in our industry? Are you there waiting for the next project to come and just like a lemming saying, yep, I'm a subcontractor, I can do that job, or I'm a materials supplier, or I'm a designer, or I'm a contractor, and you know that you have the obligation and the responsibility to put food on your table, but you have the balls enough, excuse the expression, but it's the truth, you have the balls enough to turn down a job because it's not the right thing to do. Suburban office parks, technology centers, all these things, are they necessary as opposed to more hospitals? There's this very interesting way of now starting to slice and dice our industry, not just broken into residential and commercial, which would include EPC and industrial and all that other stuff. The empirical numbers are not what we're seeing, all these new .coms that are going up there saying it's a $4 trillion, it's a $10 trillion, it's a $1.5 trillion industry here in the US domestically, period. Split 60-40, 40% residential, 60% commercial. And because of that, we're now starting to be literally challenged that tomorrow morning, the International Facility Management Association is putting out a report done by Delphi Research over a 4-month period of time of the necessity of the workplace. There's going to be some mind-blowing things that will be all over the Wall Street Journal and quoted and all that type of stuff based upon these truths. And the big truth is the uncertainty of the need for the amount of square footage here in the US, square meters everywhere else, necessary to run your business anymore. So that means you don't have to turn away people that say, I want a new building. You may want to say, I can help you, but you may not have to go through that expense, or we can retrofit this space. Just look at what the shopping centers are turning into. They're turning into mini medical and lawyer offices, right? So we're hitting this fundamental shift that is it's not, I hate the word game changer, and I hate, those big, fancy words, but we're really hitting a milestone of a shift.
Inflection point is the appropriate one, right?
Excellent, Nathan. Yes, because we are no longer, as designers, responsible for designing the space of live, work, play, and learn. We're responsible for the experience, either physically, digitally, or in the mind. And this is where things get very interesting and get very stressful, because you now need to be leading a market rather than chasing a market. And when you do that pivot through this, it means that you must think more strategically. It also means that it brings up a whole host of issues of do we now have enough people to build the built environment? Mm-hmm. Maybe we don't need as many people. Maybe the automations now are set to be here. And when you have those types of things all around you, we're looking right now at how to take the world of cultural anthropology and the understanding of human nature based upon a geolocation as the forefront of all of our master planning, all of it. It is no longer about budget. It is no longer just about the need. It's about how does this actually work for the human beings that are at that place on the planet Earth, be it in northern Greece or being in downtown Nashville. And when you start to take a look at it from the human-centric standpoint, one great word always tends to pop up. And I love that in the poll, Nathan, that you had the word empathy. Because what we have to learn as an industry is that we are no longer in the world of having to build the most important, one of the three most important things of what humans need, which is fresh water, food, and shelter. And if our responsibility is to shelter, shouldn't we then, well, couldn't we be doing this a little bit better? It's thus the reason for the CPC, right? Starting to understand that. Throw into that we have now a human-centric viewpoint on why this needs to happen. I think that, you know, this is our greatest challenge. It's our greatest truth to swallow. Right now, we're looking at the trends on a global scale that will affect the US market, where out of the ENR 500, we're looking at to be at least 200 to 250 firms going away in the next 12 months, either through M&A or just going out of business. That's the truth. This isn't made up. It's not opinion. These are the trends. This is the science of the data. Throw on top of that there's certain building types that we need to really understand why we are doing things, such as, I mean, I point to the absurdity of our industry constantly, which again is another stress. Where are we actually in this world where we've written things in concrete so much that we're afraid to break up those tenets, those foundations, such as certain types of roles, you know, because of the streamlining of trying to understand what type of building types we need. I mean, right now, the hottest thing in the world is medical. Anything from clinics to hospitals to, you know, Jesus, the idea of shifting your F&B to be, you know, socially distant enabled.
Yep.
But really, when you take the science to the data and you really start to take a look at this, here's another stress we found out. We, as the built environment professionals, are exacerbating viruses and sick buildings, yet we know we're doing it, yet we do it anyway. Mm-hmm. And I'll give you one simple example, fresh air intakes. We did a study of 6 different major metropolitan areas, and we did a survey. Where are the fresh air intakes for buildings over 20 stories tall? Street level. Mm-hmm. And people wondered why around 2 p.m. they're feeling tired or they feel a little sick. They say, well, I just had a big lunch. No, you didn't. It's just that all that exhaust at street level is being sucked into your damn building and you're being sickened slowly. Absurd. So number one thing that you can take away from this is put the fresh air intake where the frickin' fresh air is. That's step one. That's step one, right? Step two is when that fresh air does get sucked into an air handler, right? I loved my professional practice professor in school. He said, you got to get over the fact that buildings do not need to be hermetically sealed. All buildings leak both air and moisture. Your job is to make sure the moisture goes out and the air goes in. That's good design, right? So what do? We use building envelopes that hermetically seal everything, that you can't even open the door in most hotels in the downtown area for various reasons, because they think they're saving energy, yet they're destroying what's happening inside. What we're also looking at is how a mechanical system works and operates. Right now, everything is all on or all off. You know that. If you're using JCI or Honeywell or any of the big boys, right? You can set it for 72 degrees Fahrenheit, 68 degrees Fahrenheit, and you're supposed to get ambient temperature. No, you don't. What you get is blowing air, heat or cold. And what happens is, because it's all on or all off between the VAV boxes and the dampers, what you get is the number one complaint for all facility managers: it's too hot or it's too cold. Why? Because we're pushing air through an indoor situation from the bedroom to the ballroom, right? Doesn't matter. Someone's too hot, someone's too cold. There are technologies out there that help take the individual dampers and the VAV boxes to create what's called diffused distribution of air, which means there's no blowing. It's like a chaotic pressurization that happens that gives you ambient temperature from the bedroom to the ballroom. Not only does that save energy, but it limits any type of viral particles to go more than 8 inches off your face and drops 90 degrees to the surface. That exists. That exists. It's inexpensive. And we can finally be creating healthy buildings that I know what we're doing. We're implementing this thing. It's called Oero. The reason why we're doing it, because I can point across the street. Why do people want to move to buy a piece of dirt? Because the building across the street does not have that, and I do. And I can tell people, you can have a trust with your buildings and you can have the trust of the people inside the buildings. So one of the big takeaways from a mental health thing is to start to understand both inside your workplace, even if it's virtual, of the trust between each other, of how you deliver, the trust with your technology, which after Zoom today, I know we don't have too much of a trust, do we, Nathan? And then more importantly, creating the environments that we're responsible for. Remember, we're one of the 3 tenets of human beings living on this planet, which is to create shelter. Create it healthy, create it so that I can trust it. And I can trust the other human being next to me. I was in my local Kroger supermarket, a few weeks ago, and everyone has their masks on finally, right? And I'm going down the frozen food aisle. Some guy, do you ever hear people that like just can't help themselves sneezing like it's like their head's going to explode? Like, I swear to you, this happened. People left their carts full of food and ran out like a bomb exploded. Is that how we want to operate inside the built environment? So again, using technology and innovation, along with a better understanding of what's in place now so that we don't continue just writing a bad script, right? And then number 3, it'll help the trust, which helps your mental health, both from the outward deliverables of what we're doing as professionals, but also inside of our own lives. So I think that there is there is this ratio of this collision of things, but collisions can be very violent, or they can be woven very beautifully. And I think that is my challenge to everyone listening to this, is how do you find the right balance in your geography, in your profession, and in your company, and in your family? Because if you can start to balance that, we're on the road to recovery.
Very true. You brought up empathy, and also the challenge of why no one is doing this, or why many people are not doing this. And it's logical, or it's pretty obvious that you've got a lot of people out there that, as you say, have to put food and food on their table. So they're just doing what's being asked of them. And empathy works with that. You empathize with a person with a certain set of needs, and you're going to address those needs, but puts you in a perpetual downward spiral in the wrong direction sometimes if you maintain the wrong, if that empathy turns into sympathy and turns into an action. So I think there's a misunderstanding of how empathy is used. We all know what it is, but how it's used, I think, needs to be understood more. Because I know back as a police officer, we used tactical empathy, where you would empathize with the person to understand what they are going through, but it doesn't mean that you agree with them. Now the skill is about using that understanding to convince them why what they're doing is wrong, or convince them to go in another direction. So I think that's a skill that's needed for this to happen.
100%. Actually, we're fond of saying we like to disagree with empathy. And that's what you're saying right there. Yeah. Is that I don't have to agree with you, but man, I can disagree and we can still agree to sit down again, right? I mean, it's what's missing in Washington and between countries right now, is that, disagreeing with empathy. And you're right. You don't want to be empathizing where you take on that role, almost like a Stockholm syndrome, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Wait a second, I was going to convince you, but you convinced me, right? And that's actually unhealthy. And you're right, it is that downward spiral of that cascading of events. But by disagreeing with empathy, we also can open up conversations during this age of COVID that were maybe not being able to be spoken to before. I know right here in the CPC, what Sasha's doing. Those were not allowed during national conferences. I dare you talk about, us mistreating women and minorities that way. That's, again, another painful truth. That's just what it was. Not that it was like a locker room out there, but yeah, in a case in certain sites, it is a locker room, which actually gets back to another COVID truth, which is we better get our act together even quicker than what we're doing now in order to open up the economy on site.
Mm-hmm.
Looked around both in Greece now, in UK, and here in the US over the past month. And yes, by the way, I have had 5 COVID tests. I'm the most COVID-free person on the planet. They put swabs in orifices I don't even want to talk about.
Some people have
Damn. Yeah. Hello, Mister. Yeah. Right. So it was one of these, experiences that we were the only foreigners in the UK or the Greece that were actually there on site.
Yeah, it was a challenge.
And what happened was, I noticed, and once I got back to the US, I asked the same questions to a bunch of my friends in Morton's and other in other companies. How much are we unified as an industry to create a consistency from site to site? Some sites had people with all masks, with thermometers when you went on site, and they took down your name for contact tracing and everything else. Others, there were no masks. People were joking around. It was the good old boy network, blah, 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 blah. There was no consistency. And I'm talking in the same city. So, one thing we don't want to do as an industry is get yet another, government issues, whatever, with compliance officers coming around to see if we're complying again. Just adds cost, adds misery. And the last thing we want to do is get the government involved anymore. Like, we're done, do we have the guts enough to say as an industry, in the same way that we're trying to self-police ourselves with IFCs, imagine that, and those other stuff that we can't get our shit together there. But in order to keep things going, we need to be unified of a consistency that's only fair to the workers. That I know if I'm a super going around to like 6 different sites in a day, that I'm not having to figure out what the deal is. Let's come up with something that we can all agree on and say, listen, you must have a mask, you must have this, you must have that. How many sites have first aid kits on site? All of them.
Yep.
How many of them have porta potties? All of them. Yep. Okay, Mr. Architect, I challenge you. Why don't you put in the general conditions a PPE kit? X amount of disposable 3-plies, not nitrile gloves, sanitizer, hand sanitizers, a thermometer. Why isn't that just a basic key? Because that's the age we live in now. It's not going away. No, a vaccine's not going to be coming anytime soon. Even if it does, it's meant for a strain of COVID-19. We have to get down to the truths. We're living in the age of pandemics. If it's not COVID-19, it's going to be the next flu breakout. It's going to be COVID-23. Mm-hmm. Just SARS. SARS started in 2003. We still don't have a vaccine for that. What do you think is going to happen for COVID-19? Like, we're going to backfill? No, you got to start with the source. So we haven't even done that yet.
Yeah.
So I think that, as we move forward, this idea of if I have what to expect, I'm not going to be as stressed out, right? Because imagine having to go around to different sites, and one site you really don't want to go there, but that's probably the troublesome site, and I can be infected and go home and infect my family. Do we really want that? And it's not tactic. This is science and data. It just is what it is. Look what happened in the NFL this morning, right? The Tennessee had to shut down after playing the Minnesota Vikings. Now they're shut down. You see the domino effect? Imagine that on every construction site in your city.
So getting into what you're talking about is an entirely new mindset for a new age, which is really what's kind of behind me, training for the new modern VUCA world. And now if you think about it, it's going to have ripple effects across everything, the entire supply chain, the training, how everything right from design right to the field. It's going to have the conversation needs to start around the mindset. Then the mindset needs to evolve into a practical way of doing business. And so now the question is, how do we get the conversation started? What questions do you ask, and who do you ask them to?
Well, a lot of that's going to come from, of course, follow the money.
Yeah.
So it's going to be insurance companies. It's going to be your bonding agency, and it's going to be the construction loan people. If you don't start there, this is all great ideas, and I'm still learning that day by day. Now I'm on the owner's side of the table. It's also going to be some very hard-nosed owners, thank God, I've surrounded myself with just the world's best. And that's what we're requiring around the world, from the Middle East, in China, even. Actually, the Chinese have been very interesting to work with in that they're all over this. And what's great about working in a totalitarian government is they get the shit done. It's like, I'm all for totalitarian governments when it comes to implementing stuff. I have issues with other things but they get it done. But, as opposed to here in the US, where, we politicize things so much that, again, adding to the stress of everything else, like what you said, Chad, every day, it's like 100 different things you got to be like, oh, I don't watch the regular news at all anymore. It's just irrelevant. I'll put on CNBC and Bloomberg, but that even bleeds out with some stuff. So, you don't want to have your head in the ground. At the same time, I think that forums like this, in order to express not just opinions, but some real hard truths, building truth around these things, and allowing the conversation to not just die because it's a fireside chat, but to gain a life of its own, that people then bring it back into their circles and their networks and going, yeah, I get that. Because we don't have all the answers. I mean, right now, this is cow paths that we're talking about. I mean, we haven't even paved anything yet. But just the fact that we're able to talk about things like this during a quote unquote, what CPC has been known for, which is a construction technology forum. The fact that, you have, yourself leading these types of discussions, you have Sasha leading her types of discussions, that's unheard of. Mm-hmm. The AA still isn't doing anything close to this, or any of those associations. Why? God knows, because this is what's important. This is what people are talking about. And it's the reason why, people like Hal and Nick and everything have like unbelievable explosive social media followings. Like if they were on Instagram in bikinis, they'd like be number one. So,
yeah, I would.
They probably have like a fansonly.com site.
Yes. No, I think you're right. It's a little unfortunate, but I think you're right. When to drive it from the top down, like you said, follow the money. It literally needs to be done from an authoritarian type mindset to drive it down. And when you're going to force that level of change, which has to happen, and unfortunately, it has to happen quicker than what most humans are capable of handling. I only see this going in a dark direction, unfortunately, for the individual. The individual adopting to this amount of stress at the individual worker level. That's where it's really going to hurt.
Which is why I wish there was almost a resource for, 10 years in, you got to go back for like a 2-week refresher. Mm-hmm. 5 years in, you go back for a 2-week refresher, because you build up habits and you build up mechanisms to cope with the absolute chaotic absurdity of our industry. Mm-hmm. And to teach it in school doesn't help, because you haven't had that experience yet. They'd almost be like, yeah, whatever, it's an easy course, right? But actually going back and having that touchstone of individuals where you can open up, not like an Alcoholics Anonymous type of thing, but maybe something like that. Because of this thing, our industry is built upon capitalizing on the inefficiencies of how you pull a building up out of the ground, or how you build a road.
Yeah, that's where they make all the money.
Because you have general contractors out there that are built around having a staff of 20 sending out RFIs, hoping for change orders, because they know that they low bid and they got to make their money.
Yep.
I mean, that's a hard truth. Sorry. And that is
the industry built on fluff, and fluff for people, for pillows, not people.
Correct. Right. Yep. And then on top of that, there's entire professions within our industry that really don't need to be there, and they know it. But they're the first ones to say if there's a process change or a technology, because the technology shines a light on the problem, they're the first ones to say, no, it's all bull crap, or it doesn't work, and they sabotage it. Mm-hmm. Why? Because they still want to put food on their table. Maybe we need a reckoning inside of our industry where we just have to say, stop the insanity. You don't belong here. Sorry.
That's a movement that we're fighting for all the time. And, when it comes to people's mental health, I think a lot of the maintenance and making sure that the conversations happen comes on the leaders and managers. And it's so easy. still can't believe that people don't do it. For instance, the fighters that I train, for example, the first question out of my mouth every single training session is, are there any injuries that I need to worry about that you need to work around? And rank your level of focus that I'm going to see today. And that gives me a perspective of where their mentality is at. When I come into Plexus and I'm working with one of the girls that I work with, Monique, I'm saying, hey, how do you feel about your workload this week? Do you think that there is anything at risk? And I ask her flat out, what kind of focus do you think you're going to have today? Do you feel like you're in control of your day? I just ask these simple questions, and that gives me perspective of the symptoms that show up on the acute onset of critical stress. So having the conversation like, hey, how do you feel today? It doesn't really get to the nuts and bolts, but for me, I'm not necessarily worried about training somebody technically. I'm always worried about what's going on in their head. I'm worried about their cognitive performance under pressure. So that's why I ask the questions that will identify that symptoms are starting to arise because they're getting overwhelmed. Critical stress always comes down to two things: lack of time and lack of options. So when you just ask somebody, listen, hey, how do you feel about your workload this week? Is there anything that at risk that we need to throw any resources? Do you feel in control of your day? Rank your focus that you think you're going to have today. If they are saying 8, 9, 7, but then they have 3 days of a 3 and a 2, hey, why? What's going on? Where do you need help?
I've never heard that conversation.
So, really?
I've never heard that conversation.
I do it every Monday, every single Monday.
On a job site.
Oh, okay.
It'd be very interesting to take what you've done and weave that into conversations that people would feel comfortable with.
Safety. That's exactly it. It's if you have this conversation on job sites, and somebody, it's an out for them. I had a bad morning with my wife, and you know what?
My football team lost, and I sucked at my fantasy team. I mean, real.
For real. And
those things are real for those people. Yeah.
Honestly, sir, I'm gonna rate myself at a 3 right now going into this day. Okay, you know what? I'm gonna put you on light duties. I don't want you handling any heavy equipment. There's a little bit of things here, but let's discuss why. I can't stress how important it is to not focus on the technical skill focus on the technical skill less than what is happening up here. So, and they're so simple. These conversations are so simple, and people like being asked these questions. So it's
that's a light bulb moment for me, Chad. Thank you.
No,
that's cool.
Awesome. I'd say, I think you're right in the approach. Follow the money. You create the mindset. It really does have to be an authoritative dictatorship, top-driven mindset to literally enforce change. But then you also work from the bottom up to make sure that people can handle it cognitively, because nobody likes change. They want their comfort. And honestly, from my experience, comfort actually kills performance. You want a little bit of discomfort. You want some real honest conversations, but make the conversations easy to have at least.
And as we close out this, this part of the session, I really do hope, and I know hope sounds strategy, but I really do hope that these discussions have a shelf life, and that they just go away because it becomes part of just doing business.
Mm-hmm.
That's my hope, because anything great should be transparent to the process. So I'm just hoping that these discussions can continue, I think that when it comes down to human beings, I have an optimistic view. But you are right. If you handle it in the wrong way, it can go into a very dark place.
Yeah.
And I think that the world needs one of the largest industries in the world to be leaders right now, because we're going to be building our way out of this economically. I've seen that now from the Prime Minister of Greece to the White House to central government in Beijing. They're all building their way out of this thing. And so if we can create a safe environment for that, both mentally and physically, well, then we've done our job.
100%. Yeah, you're right. We can't rely on anyone else to do it. So we got to build ourselves out of it ourselves.
And Nathan, we made it.
Yes.
It's 10 seconds to go.
With that, we'll jump into our next topic on hand, which is the mental health roundtable with the focus on destigmatization. It was moderated by Chad, and I was able to sit in on a little bit of what Paul was talking about, and it resonated so well with some of the things we see in my organization, and really looking forward to how you guys break that down today, Chad.
Yeah, it was awesome. Paul, always a pleasure having you on board. So your insight is it's always an honor to have you contribute to these conversations, which are so important. So this conversation was about tying mental health to build. We've moved from kind of a tactical age where we were building everything that people wanted, and now we're transitioning into the kind of the COVID age where we really need to start building what people need. And Paul had a ton of examples of things that he is personally involved in, one being directly involved with the White House and Greece, which was quite impressive to listen to. So I highly recommend listening to the talk just for that alone. But what was important was, as we navigate into this new age, it's going to take some really strong leadership from the top down to drive these changes. And what is expected with these kind of authoritarian, almost dictatorship-like driving down, top down driving of this change in mindset and how we approach build to put mental health at the center of build. There's going to be a lot of conflict that comes of that because people don't like change, obviously. And that spawned into a conversation of the impact on the workers themselves, because no one likes having boundaries put on them. And as we spoke about the mental health of the workers, trying to navigate all of the mental health challenges of COVID and the changes that are going to be coming down the pipeline in their industry, we had some pretty good tactical things that would help with that. From my personal experience, we spoke about how we get the conversation going about mental health with individuals. Now, the goal here is obviously to destigmatize and normalize the conversation around mental health with individuals. And that is a conversation that is really difficult for a lot of people to have. And the question, hey, are you okay, sometimes doesn't work, and it doesn't get the right results, and it doesn't get people talking because the safety isn't there. And it sometimes takes a lot of effort to create a culture with a lot of psychological safety. But from my own personal experience, it's actually a lot more simple than that. So I just shared what I do with the fighters that I train. And every single practice I come in, I'm like, hey, do you have any injuries that we need to work around? And rank your focus for me that we're going to get today. And it's a tactic that really works, because if a fighter is coming in and he's always saying, I'm at an 8 today, I'm at a 9 today, I'm going to give you a 3 today, I know that there's something wrong, and that starts the conversation. And we use the same tactics here at Plexus, where on my team, every Monday, okay, how do you feel about your workload this week? Do you feel like you have control of your day? Is everything good there? Okay, do you think there's anything at risk that we need to pump some more resources into? Those conversations where you're not directly asking about their mental state will still give you insight on their mental state. And that's where you as a leader, you can ask, okay, why is your focus being ranked so low for the last 3 days? What's going on? So those simple things really help a lot. So yeah, this conversation snowballed right from the top. The challenges at the top, where, as Paul says, we are following the money and driving the change through almost an authoritarian type mentality, and coming up right from the bottom just to make sure everybody is performing at their best while maintaining good, strong physical and mental health.